I hear so many young people today talk about a world that's emptied of heroism, where there are no more noble things to do. What do you say to them?
The story of Star Wars means something to people, and that's even true in Star Wars.
Darth Vader.
But as for what that story means, well, there's probably as many answers to that as there are people watching this video. So it might be easier to focus on what Star Wars means to its storyteller. After all, the reason C-3PO is telling the Star Wars story is because he's trying to explain who he is. Which, in a sense, is what George Lucas was doing too. But the most personal parts of this series probably aren't wrapped up in C-3PO.
Yes, R2, I was just coming to that.
They probably have more to do with the character Lucas, named after himself. Not that you would know from the way people talk about him. Luke is often treated like he's just a generic hero archetype. People will even refer to other characters as the Luke Skywalker character, and what they mean is the sincere, if somewhat boring character the larger story revolves around. Now, this is obviously a little insulting if you care about the Frodos and Katnisses of the world.
I care.
But in fairness to the people who say things like this, Luke thinks of himself as a generic hero too. It's just that what George Lucas has in store for his namesake proves to be much more unique and interesting than that. Luke starts off A New Hope stuck at the dead end of life on a basically empty planet.
Where are you going?
Looks like I'm going nowhere.
When he meets Obi-Wan and receives his father's lightsaber, it turns his vague dreams of leaving someday into something much more concrete.
I want to come with you to Alderaan.
Essentially, Luke now has a destiny.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
And at this point, it does seem like Lucas is telling a generic hero type of story. The rest of the movie could be almost any fantasy adventure, with Luke taken from humble beginnings by a wizard who gives him a magic sword to save a princess from a dark tower guarded by an evil sorcerer. Pretty standard stuff. As the story wraps up, it's hard to see what would separate Luke Skywalker from any of a dozen other heroes. Until the next movie starts. In Empire, every single trait that led Luke to becoming a hero suddenly works against his destiny of becoming a Jedi. You know, sometimes Lucas doesn't get credit for how clearly defined his characters are. In this case, Luke is loyal to a fault.
I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
Fearless when it's time for action.
The droids belong to her. She's the one in the message. We gotta help her.
And a little impatient with the people who doubt him.
Who's gonna fly it, kid? You?
You bet I could. I'm not such a bad pilot myself. I don't have to sit here and listen.
Only this time, instead of flying him to victory, these traits cause him to crash and burn. Which actually happens twice, just in case you miss it the first time. We're starting to see that Lucas's vision of heroism is a lot more complex than it appears. When Luke's frustration boils over at the universe blocking his path to becoming a Jedi, he's told point blank, it's not the universe that has the wrong idea.
Adventure. Excitement. A Jedi craves not these things. You are reckless.
His training is repeatedly sabotaged by his refusal to understand what he's seeing and hearing, no matter how strong of a warning he gets. Everything that happens on Dagobah suggests that who Luke is and who he wants to be aren't the same person at all.
You want the impossible.
It's not even surprising when Vader is able to use his fearlessness and loyalty to lure him into a trap.
I can't keep the vision out of my head. They're my friends. I gotta help them.
You must not go.
But Han and Leia will die if I don't.
He can't see himself as anything other than the hero coming in to rescue his friends. What's important to hammer home here is that at no point in this self-destructive spiral is Luke ever acting out of character. This is who he is.
Luke, don't hit the trap! It's a trap!
It's just that being a hero is one thing, and being a Jedi is something very different.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker.
But you are not a Jedi yet.
But whatever the dangers on Luke's path to becoming a Jedi, they're nothing compared to the dangers on the path of becoming like his father.
I am your father.
This reveal isn't famous just because Luke's dad is the bad guy. It's famous because this is the moment Luke suddenly realizes that he's promised to turn into this man. No! He finally sees the other path he might be going down.
Luke, it is your destiny.
Turns out Luke's destiny has a real, well, dark side to it.
Why didn't you tell me?
Lucas is telling a different sort of story from most of his contemporaries. Not every hero deals with questions of destiny or fate, but when they do, it usually means the hero has a feeling that they really ought to be someone more remarkable or more important or just cooler than they already are. And meeting that destiny either means becoming an awesome version of themselves or just becoming themselves. Here's a specific example. The new version of Captain Kirk starts off as a very similar character to Luke Skywalker. He's a hot rodder who grows up around a farm and never knew his father, but feels the pressure to become a great pilot like him anyway, and can't escape this nagging feeling that he belongs among the Okay, geez, this is like the exact same. Anyway, the big difference between them is that his flaw is running away from his destiny.
Why are you talking to me, man?
His mentor figures basically spend the whole movie begging him to follow that feeling that he was destined for something great. And once he decides to go for it, things fall into place really quickly. It's a movie that looks quite a bit like Star Wars, but it's basically doing the opposite of everything that Star Wars is about. You know, if anybody asks. Star Wars belongs to an older tradition, one in which the words destiny and fate meant the same thing as the word doom. In those older stories, meeting your destiny might be inevitable, but it wasn't likely to be a pleasant experience. This isn't to say that those other movies are bad, it's just to point out that the older tradition understood heroism, but it also felt that ambition would often have unforeseen consequences.
Because I think the core issues that I'm dealing with are, if they were valid 2,000 years ago, they've got to still be valid today, even though they're not in fashion. And I think we've gone for a few generations where a lot of the sort of more basic stories have fallen by the wayside.
Luke's doom is still undecided at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, which is why on the one hand he's looking and acting uncomfortably like Darth Vader, while at the same time he's back to the role of hero and even seems to have picked up some Jedi-like traits. He's willing to be patient and plan things, leaving Jabba to make all the impulsive mistakes. It's almost like Luke has gotten stronger in both of the conflicting halves of his destiny. His meetings with Yoda and Obi-Wan confirm this, that he hasn't chosen a path until he's willing to face his doom head on.
You must confront Vader. Only then a Jedi will you be.
The heart of the conflict Lucas is building here is that either Luke has to kill his father or give up on his dream of becoming a Jedi. But Luke identifies too much with the man he now sees as Anakin Skywalker.
I can't kill my own father.
He understands the connection between them, even if Vader himself denies it.
That name no longer has any meaning for me.
By the way, all of this is happening in what is ostensibly a children's adventure movie. The increasingly internal nature of the conflict in the Star Wars saga is another thing that separates it from most of its other peers. It's also why it's fine that the battle above the second Death Star is so reminiscent of the battle above the first. It reminds us that the conflict facing Luke is no longer out there, but in here. The confrontation with the Emperor is where Lucas will resolve the question of whether Luke will be able to vanquish the supreme avatar of the dark side, while the alternative is literally staring him in the face. And of course, when George Lucas has a question like that, there's only one way it's going to be answered. The question of destiny hangs over every duel in the Star Wars saga. So, Return of the Jedi features the last Duel of the Fates. This final duel is about whether Luke can escape his father's destiny. And though Luke is always looking for the high ground, he can't ever stay above Vader for long, because ultimately, he isn't. Whatever one of them is capable of, the other is as well. This is why it's misguided to think that the Star Wars movie's vision of good and evil is just black and white. Lucas isn't telling stories about good people and evil people. He's telling stories about characters who can choose good or evil. The light side and the dark side are the two paths these choices take them down. As long as Luke can't make this choice, he's left at the mercy of his emotions, which can take him to a pretty dark place.
Luke works intuitively through most of the movie until he gets to the very end. He goes back and forth with his emotions about fighting his father, not fighting his father.
Luke's hatred of the idea of following his father's destiny leads him to try to destroy that destiny completely. Which is exactly the idea.
Good, Anakin, good. Fulfill your destiny and take your father's place at my side.
In Star Wars, destiny is a trap. Destroying Vader and becoming Vader are the same thing.
Never.
If Luke wants to decide his own destiny, it means he has to embrace the good still left in his father.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
And then, finally, someone is willing to call him a Jedi Knight.
So be it, Jedi.
Ultimately, doesn't it take a leap of faith?
Yes. You'll notice Luke uses that quite a bit.
Luke doesn't find victory the way other heroes do either. At the end of each Star Wars movie, Luke has to surrender and allow someone else to save him. This time, there's only one person that could be. The path Luke finds to his destiny is important because if he can become a Jedi like his father can become a Jedi like him. The ultimate irony of Luke being talked about as a generic hero is that at the end of the day, he's not the hero of the story at all. And so ends the story of Star Wars. Well, okay, obviously not exactly. But now the stories are told by someone other than George Lucas. What that ultimately means for Star Wars is probably best left for another time. But at the very least, it changes what Star Wars means. It kinda has to change it, since what Star Wars always meant for Lucas was a way to tell all of us who he is.
I've discovered along the way that happiness, you live in two worlds here. Happiness is pleasure, and happiness is joy. Pleasure is short-lived. It lasts an hour, lasts a minute, lasts a month, and it peaks and then goes down. It peaks very high. But the next time you want to get that same peak, you have to do it twice as much. It's like drugs. On the other hand is joy. Joy is a thing that doesn't go as high as pleasure, but it stays with you. Joy is something you can recall. The secret is that even though it's not as intense as the pleasure, the joy will last you a lot longer. People who get the pleasure, they keep saying, well, if I can just get richer and get more cars, you'll never relive the moment you got your first car. That's it. That's the highest peak. If you're trying to sustain that level of peak pleasure, you're doomed. Just accept the fact that it's here and it's gone. And maybe again it'll come back. Pleasure is purely self-centered. It's all about your pleasure. It's a selfish, self-centered emotion that's created by a self-centered motive of greed. Joy is compassion. Joy is giving yourself to somebody else or something else. And it's a kind of thing that is, in its subtlety and lowness, much more powerful than pleasure. If you get hung up on pleasure, you're doomed. If you pursue joy, you will find everlasting happiness. So with that, I'm gone. Bye-bye, thank you.
That's it for the Lucas saga. For now, at least. Subscribe or click around below if you want to be first in line when this channel tackles the sequel trilogy. And the comments might be a good place to talk about what Star Wars means to you until that project comes around.
I've traveled too far and seen too much to ignore the despair in the galaxy.